I turned the ferry around last night. Full route. 11 miles from the mainland terminal. 312 passengers on board. A crossing we've made 6,000 times without incident. I turned it around because of a woman in seat 7C who was not the woman who sat down in seat 7C. I need to say that more carefully. The woman who boarded and sat in 7C had brown hair, a green coat, and a rolling suitcase with a torn luggage tag. I know this because I watched her board. I always watch the late boarders. That's what I need to explain. My name is Neil Egan. I captained the 11:15 p.m. run of the MV Carrigan, a passenger and vehicle ferry that crosses the Narragansett Bay from Brookhaven on the mainland to Carden Island, 7 nights a week, year-round. The Carrigan is the last departure of the day. After us, the next boat doesn't leave until 5:40 a.m. If you need to get to Carden Island between midnight and dawn, we're it. The crossing takes 51 minutes in calm water. A little longer in heavy chop, which we get November through March when the Atlantic pushes weather into the bay. The Carrigan carries up to 400 passengers on 2 decks, plus 38 vehicles on the car deck below. My crew is 4, First Mate Ren Almeida, deckhands Tommy Pruitt and Yara Hassan, and our engineer, Kip Sorensen, who's been on the Carrigan since before I took the captain's chair. It's a quiet run. Most of our regular passengers are Carden residents coming home from late shifts, a few tourists in summer, the occasional contractor finishing a job on the mainland. By 11:15 p.m., most people are tired. They sit, they close their eyes, they scroll their phones. The crossing is uneventful. That's how it's supposed to be. The late boarders are different. I should define what I mean by that. The Carrigan's boarding call goes out at 11 o'clock. Pedestrian passengers board between 11 o'clock and 11:10. Vehicles start loading at 10:45. At 11:10, Tommy or Yara closes the pedestrian gangway and we begin our departure sequence. We cast off lines at 11:15, plus or minus 2 minutes depending on vehicle loading. A late boarder is someone who arrives after the gangway is closed. This happens more than you'd think. Someone running from the parking lot. A car screeching into the vehicle queue at 11:13. The general expectation in the ferry service industry is that late is late, the schedule is the schedule, and if you miss the boat, you wait for the next one. But the Carrigan is the last boat. And Carden Island, in the winter, can be a difficult place to not get home to. It's a real community. Small. About 3,000 year-round residents. People who work on the mainland and commute by ferry. People with kids waiting, with medications in their kitchen that they need to take at midnight, with dogs that haven't been let out, with elderly parents who get confused when routines break. So we let late boarders on. Almost always. If someone comes running down the dock at 11:12, Tommy reopens the gangway. If a car pulls in at 11:14, Yara waves them onto the car deck. It's a courtesy. A small-town kindness. 6 years ago, when I took over the Carrigan from the previous captain, a man named Wallace Hurd who'd run the night route for 19 years, he gave me a handwritten note. Not a formal document. Not anything from the ferry company. A single sheet of legal pad paper, folded in thirds, with a list on it. He said, "This is for the late ones." I unfolded it and read it. It contained 6 items. I won't reproduce them exactly, because the phrasing was Wallace's and I've since rewritten them in language that makes sense to me, but the substance was this. Count them when they board. Count them again 30 minutes into the crossing. If the number is different, do not recount. Accept the number you have. That was the first one. The second, assign them seats in the aft section of the upper deck. Do not let them sit in the forward cabin. If they move forward on their own, ask them once to return to aft. If they refuse, do not ask again. Third, if a late boarder has no luggage, no bag, nothing in their hands, offer them a blanket from the storage locker on the upper deck. Do not touch them when handing it over. Fourth, do not make eye contact with a late boarder for longer than 2 seconds. Brief glances are fine. Extended looks are not. Fifth, if a late boarder asks you a question about the route, the arrival time, or the island, answer honestly. If they ask you a personal question, your name, where you live, whether you have family, do not answer. Change the subject or walk away. Sixth, when the ferry docks at Carden and passengers disembark, the late boarders will be the last to leave. Do not rush them. Do not offer assistance. Let them walk off the boat at their own pace, and do not watch which direction they go once they step off the gangway. I read the list twice. Then I looked at Wallace. He was 61 years old, retiring, moving to Arizona. He'd been a steady, practical man the entire time I'd known him. Not superstitious. Not dramatic. He built furniture in his garage and coached youth soccer on Carden. He was the last person I'd expect to hand me a list of cryptic instructions about passenger management. I asked him what it meant. He said, "You'll know when you need it. Most crossings, you won't. The late ones are almost always just late. Regular people who lost track of time. You'll let them on, they'll sit down, they'll get off at Carden, and that's that. But maybe once a month, maybe less, someone will board late and something about them won't sit right with you. Not dangerous. Not threatening. Just wrong in a way you can't name. When that happens, follow the list. And if I don't?" Wallace looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "The Carrigan has been running the night route since 1987. I've been on it since 2005. Before me was a captain named Dolores Fenn. Before her was the original captain, a man named Artie Beach. Artie wrote the first version of that list. Dolores revised it. I revised it again. Each of us added something because each of us learned something the hard way. What did you learn?" I learned the fifth one. About the personal questions. He rubbed the back of his neck. A woman boarded late one night in February 2011. No luggage. I gave her a blanket, like the list says. She was sitting in aft, like the list says. I was doing a walkthrough, and she asked me my name. I told her. She asked me if I had children. I told her I had a son, Marcus. She smiled and thanked me. He stopped. And Marcus had nightmares for 3 weeks. Not regular nightmares. He was 8 years old and he started dreaming about a ferry crossing. A specific one. The details he described, the weather, the time, the sound of the engine, matched a crossing I'd made on the night of November 9, 2009. 2 years before the woman boarded. Marcus wasn't on that crossing. He'd never been on the Carrigan at night. But he was dreaming my memories of a specific run, and in his dreams, there was a woman sitting in the aft section who kept saying his name. Wallace handed me the captain's log binder for the Carrigan. 20 years of logs. November 9, 2009, he said. Look it up. I did. The log entry for that date was routine. Departure 11:15 p.m. Crossing time 53 minutes, slight chop. 147 passengers. 7 vehicles. No incidents. But at the bottom of the entry, in Wallace's handwriting, was a note that wasn't part of the standard log format: late boarder. 1. Female. No luggage. Seat aft. Did not disembark at Carden. Did not disembark. I asked Wallace what that meant. He said the woman had been seated in the aft section when they docked. He'd made the announcement. All other passengers left. He went to check the aft cabin and it was empty. He checked the entire upper deck, the lower deck, the car deck, the restrooms, the crew areas. The woman was not on the boat. But she had not walked off the gangway either. Tommy's predecessor, a deckhand named Carl, had been counting passengers off, and his count was one short of the boarding count. She didn't leave. But she wasn't there. Wallace told me this was the only time it had happened to him. In 19 years. One passenger who boarded and neither disembarked nor remained. Dolores had it happen 3 times, he said. Artie had it happen 6 times. It's becoming less frequent. Whatever the reason for that is, I don't know. But the list helps. The list keeps things contained. When you follow the list, the crossing goes normally. The wrong ones board, they sit quietly, they get off at Carden, they disappear into the island, and nothing bad happens. The list is what keeps the transaction clean. He used that word. Transaction. I didn't ask what it meant. I should have. I've been asking myself what it means for 6 years. For the first 2 years, I followed the list without needing it. Late boarders were just late. Tired commuters, sheepish tourists, a local who'd had one too many beers at a mainland bar. Normal people, boarding a normal ferry, making a normal crossing. Then, in November of my 2nd year, I had my first one. A man. Late 40s, maybe. He came down the dock at 11:13, not running but walking fast, the way someone walks when they've been walking fast for a long time and don't know how to stop. No luggage. No coat, which was unusual for November on the water. Tommy reopened the gangway and waved him on. I was on the bridge, watching through the forward window. Something about the man's walk registered wrong. Not a limp. Not an injury. It was more like his stride was slightly too long for his body, as if he were used to covering ground in a frame that was taller than the one he currently occupied. I went down to the upper deck and offered him a blanket from the storage locker. He took it without looking at me. I directed him to the aft section. He sat. I returned to the bridge. 20 minutes into the crossing, I did my count. Wren was with me. I'd told Wren about the list, I'd told all my crew, because Wallace said Dolores had kept it secret from her crew and there had been a mistake, and Wren understood the count protocol. We'd boarded 161 passengers that night, including the late men. At the 20-minute mark, Wren walked through both decks and counted. 162. 1 extra. I remembered the first item on the list. If the number is different, do not recount. Accept the number you have. Every part of my brain wanted to send Wren back through to count again. To find the discrepancy. To locate the extra body and resolve it into a rational explanation, someone he'd missed on the first boarding count, someone who'd come up from the car deck, a child who'd been sleeping under a coat. I didn't recount. I accepted 162 and I sailed the crossing. The men in aft sat still the entire time. Didn't use a phone. Didn't read. Didn't sleep. Just sat, wrapped in the ferry company blanket, facing the dark water through the aft windows. When we docked at Carden, all passengers disembarked. The man was last, as the list predicted. He walked off the gangway at his own pace, which was that same too-long stride, and I did not watch which direction he went. Yara, who'd been at the gangway, counted 162 passengers off. 162 on. 162 off. But we'd only boarded 161. I logged it the way Wallace had, a note at the bottom of the standard entry. Late boarder. 1. Mail. No luggage. Seat aft. Disembarked Carden. Count discrepancy +1. And then I went home and slept badly and told myself it was a miscount. Over the next 4 years, it happened 11 more times. Not monthly, not on any schedule I could find. Sometimes 3 months would pass with nothing. Once, it happened on consecutive nights. The late boarders who triggered the list were always alone. They never arrived in pairs or groups. They always walked, never drove a car onto the vehicle deck. Most had no luggage. A few had a single bag, always small, always held close to the body. They were men and women of various ages and appearances. There was no visual pattern that connected them, no single feature I could point to and say, that's how you know. But I always knew. Within seconds of seeing them on the dock, I knew. Something in the way they moved, or the way the air felt when they crossed the gangway, or the way my crew, without being told, without consciously deciding, gave them a wider berth than they gave other passengers. It was instinctive. Preverbal. The part of the human brain that predates language recognizing something that language was never built to describe. I followed the list every time. I counted. I accepted the discrepancy. I seated them aft. I didn't look too long. I didn't answer personal questions. I let them leave last. And every time, the crossing was normal. Uneventful. The list worked. Until 4 months ago. January 7th. A Wednesday. Cold, 22 degrees, wind chill near 10. The kind of night where the bay has a skin of ice near the shore and the Carrigan's hull makes a sound like breaking glass as it pulls out. We had a light load. 89 passengers. 14 vehicles. At 11:12, a woman came down the dock. Brown hair. Green coat. Rolling suitcase with a torn luggage tag. She was moving fast but not running. Tommy opened the gangway. She boarded. I was on the bridge and I watched her cross onto the upper deck and sit down. She sat in the forward cabin. Not aft. I went down. I approached her. She was mid-30s, tired-looking, with the kind of exhaustion that isn't about sleep but about sustained effort, weeks or months of something grinding her down. Her suitcase was at her feet. The torn luggage tag read PVD, which is the airport code for Providence. She'd flown in from somewhere. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but I need to ask you to move to the aft section." She looked at me. Direct eye contact. Not hostile, not confused. Measured. Why? It's a seating preference for late boarders. The aft section has more space this time of night. She smiled. It was a small, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'd rather sit here, if that's all right. I get nauseous facing backward. The list says, ask once. If they refuse, do not ask again. She hadn't technically refused. She'd given a reason and expressed a preference. But the intent was the same. She wasn't going to move. I went back to the bridge. Ren was at the helm. "Late one?" he asked. "Forward cabin." Ren looked at me. In 4 years, none of them had ever resisted the aft request. They'd all gone willingly, almost as if they'd expected to be directed there. As if the aft section was where they understood they belonged. This woman had chosen forward. She'd chosen to face the direction we were traveling. To face Carden Island. We cast off at 11:17. 2 minutes late. The bay was calm despite the cold, flat, black water, no chop, the kind of still surface that makes you feel like you're not on water at all but sliding across something solid and dark. At 11:38, 21 minutes into the crossing, I did the count. I went myself this time instead of sending Ren. I walked through the lower deck first. 43 passengers. Then the upper deck, aft section. 29. Then the upper deck, forward cabin. I counted the forward cabin twice. Not because I was following or breaking the list's rule, but because the first number didn't make sense. 89 passengers had boarded, including the woman. 43 on the lower deck. 29 in aft. That's 72. There should have been 17 people in the forward cabin. I counted 18. Then I counted again. 19. I was standing in the doorway of the forward cabin, looking at rows of seats, some occupied, some empty, and every time I counted, the number was one higher than the last time. Not because anyone was moving. Not because I could see anyone new appearing. The faces were all the same. The same man in the blue jacket by the window. The same teenager with headphones. The same elderly couple sharing a thermos. All the same people, in the same seats, and yet each count produced a higher number. 17. 18. 19. I stopped counting. The list says do not recount. I'd already broken that rule. I stopped before I could break it further and find out whether the number would keep climbing. I went back to the bridge and told Ren. "How many extra?" he asked. "I don't know. It kept changing." Ren was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's new." It was new. In all the previous events, the discrepancy was always +1. 1 extra. A single additional presence that appeared between boarding and the mid-crossing count. This was different. This was a number that refused to be fixed. A count that increased under observation, as if the act of counting was itself producing more. At 11:44, I made a decision that was mine alone. I slowed the Carrigan. Our normal cruising speed for the crossing is 12 knots. I brought it down to 8. This would add approximately 16 minutes to our arrival time, putting us into Carden around 12:22 a.m. instead of 12:06. I didn't tell the passengers. On a calm night, the speed difference isn't perceptible to someone sitting inside the cabin. The engine pitch drops slightly, but most people don't notice. I slowed down because I wanted more time. Not to observe, not to count again, I wanted more time on the water, in transit, before we reached the island. Because something was telling me that arriving at Carden with this particular load of passengers was a bad idea. That whatever was accumulating in the forward cabin needed to not reach the other side. This was the first active choice I made. And it set everything else in motion. At 11:51, Tommy called the bridge from the car deck. His voice was strange. "Cap, I'm down here doing the vehicle check. There's a car I don't recognize." "What do you mean?" "I mean I loaded 14 vehicles tonight. I've got their plates in the log. I'm looking at a 15th car. Silver sedan. No plate. Engine's off, but it's warm." I put my hand on the hood. "It's warm, Cap." A warm car on the vehicle deck that hadn't been loaded. That no one had driven on. Is anyone inside it? Windows are fogged. Can't see in. Don't open it. I said that without thinking. It came from the same place the list came from, the preverbal part, the part that understands before it can explain. Tommy didn't open it. At 11:58, Yara came up to the bridge. She'd been doing a walkthrough of the lower deck and she told me something that made my hands tighten on the console. "There's a woman on the lower deck. Brown hair, green coat. Rolling suitcase. She's in the forward cabin. She's also on the lower deck." I didn't respond. Yara waited. "Seat 7C?" I asked. I didn't check the seat number. "She's in the port side section, about halfway back. Sitting by the window." The woman with the brown hair and green coat and rolling suitcase had boarded once. I'd watched her board. I'd spoken to her in the forward cabin. And now she was also on the lower deck. This was not a twin. This was not a similar-looking passenger. Yara had been on the Carrigan for 3 years. She knew about the list. She wouldn't have come to me about a resemblance. "Did she see you?" I asked. She was looking out the window. "At what?" Yara paused. "There's nothing out there, Cap. We're mid-channel. It's dark." But she was looking at something. At 12:04 a.m., I made my second decision. I turned the ferry around. Ren looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Turning a ferry mid-crossing is not a casual action. It's a full-helm maneuver that takes nearly 4 minutes in calm water. Every passenger on board feels it. There would be questions. There might be complaints. The company would want an explanation. "Come about to 180, I said. "We're going back to Brookhaven." "On what grounds?" "Mechanical concern." "Use that if anyone asks." Ren didn't argue. He'd been with me long enough and he'd seen enough list events to trust that when I made a call like this, I had a reason. The Carrigan began her turn. Through the bridge window, I watched the bow swing south, then west, then north, the lights of Carden Island sliding from our forward view to our starboard quarter. We'd been 37 minutes into a 51-minute crossing. Carden was close. Maybe 4 miles. As we came about, the ferry's PA system clicked on. I hadn't activated it. Ren hadn't activated it. The PA on the Carrigan is controlled from 2 points, the bridge console and a wall-mounted panel in the crew office on the lower deck. Both require a physical button press. What came through the speakers was not a voice. It was the sound of the bay. Water against a hull. The rhythmic slap of small waves on metal. But layered underneath it, barely audible, like something spoken into a pillow, was a tone. A frequency. Not mechanical. Organic. The sound a throat makes before it forms a word. It lasted 4 seconds. Then the PA clicked off. Ren and I looked at each other. Tell me you pressed something, I said. He held up both hands. They were on the wheel. I called Tommy on the car deck radio. Did anyone access the crew office PA panel? Negative, Cap crew office is locked. I've got the key. I called Yara. Where are you? Upper deck. Aft section. The passengers back here are asking why we're turning around. Tell them mechanical caution, expected return to Brookhaven, we apologize for the inconvenience. Don't go to the forward cabin. Copy. I didn't explain why. I didn't know why, not in any way I could articulate. But the woman in the forward cabin who was also on the lower deck, the woman who was multiplying in count, whose presence was accumulating, who had resisted the one directive that every other list passenger had accepted without question, I did not want my crew near her. At 12:11, we were heading back north, Brookhaven's dock lights visible on the horizon. 17 minutes to landing. The bay was still dead calm, which struck me now as its own kind of wrong. January in Narragansett Bay, 22 degrees, and the water was a sheet of glass. No wind. No current. As if the bay itself were holding still. My phone buzzed. A text from Kip, down in the engine room. Fuel consumption is off. We're burning 30% more than the speed should require. Like something is dragging. I'd slowed us to 8 knots more than 30 minutes ago. At 8 knots, the Carrigan's fuel consumption is predictable to within a narrow margin. A 30% increase meant something was adding resistance. Additional weight, something in the water against the hull, a mechanical drag, but Kip knew his engines. If it were mechanical, he'd have said mechanical. I texted back, can you look at the hull below the waterline? Camera 6. Camera 6 is a maintenance camera mounted inside the car deck, pointed at the hull's interior surface near the keel. It's used for checking for leaks, not for external viewing, but in calm water you can sometimes see shadows through the hull plating if something large is alongside. Kip responded 45 seconds later. Not a text. A photo. Camera 6 showed the interior hull surface. Normal steel plating, normal rivet lines, normal bilge channel at the bottom of the frame. But on the surface of the hull, on the inside, not the outside, there were marks. Dark marks, roughly the size of palm prints, arranged in a pattern that started at the waterline and extended upward in a column, evenly spaced, like someone had been climbing. From the outside. Up the hull. Onto the deck. When did those appear? I texted. They weren't there at departure check. I inspected that section at 10:50. 70 minutes ago. The marks had appeared sometime during the crossing. I stared at the photo and I thought about the 15th car on the vehicle deck. The warm one with fogged windows and no plate. I thought about the count in the forward cabin that kept climbing. I thought about the woman in 2 places at once. And I thought about something Wallace had said that I'd turned over in my mind 100 times without ever fully understanding it. The list keeps the transaction clean. A transaction. Something is exchanged. Something moves from one side to another. The mainland to the island. And the late boarders, the real ones, the list ones, were part of that exchange. They boarded on the mainland side and disembarked on the island side. They were carried across. That was the transaction. The ferry didn't just transport them. It facilitated a crossing that they couldn't make on their own. A crossing that, without the ferry, without a captain who allowed them on, simply couldn't happen. And the list, the count, the seating, the no eye contact, the no personal questions, Those weren't protections against the passengers. They were terms. Conditions of carriage. The list was a contract, and as long as both sides honored it, the crossing was clean. 1 boards. 1 extra appears. They sit aft. They don't learn your name. They leave at their own pace. Transaction complete. But this woman had broken the terms. She'd refused aft. She'd sat forward. She'd looked at me. She'd multiplied. She was on 2 decks at once. Something had climbed the hull. The count wouldn't hold still. The transaction wasn't clean. And I was turning the boat around, taking her back to the mainland, refusing to complete the crossing. I was breaking the contract from my side. At 12:18, Wren said, "Cap, look at the forward camera." The bridge has a monitor that cycles between 6 security cameras around the vessel. Wren had locked it on camera 2, which covers the forward cabin from a ceiling-mounted angle. The forward cabin had 17 occupied seats when we departed. My climbing count had reached 19 before I stopped. On camera 2, I could see the cabin clearly. The same passengers in the same seats. The man in the blue jacket. The teenager. The elderly couple. And the woman in the green coat, in what I now saw was seat 7C, sitting perfectly still. Behind her, seats 8C, 9C, and 10C were occupied by 3 women in green coats. Same coat. Same brown hair. Same posture. Same angle of the head. 4 of her. In a row. Like a sequence. Like something being duplicated, each copy placed 1 row further back, filling the cabin seat by seat. I looked at the rest of the rows behind 10C. 11C, empty. 12C, a shape. Hard to tell on the small monitor. Could be a shadow. Could be a coat draped over a seat. Could be a 5th one, not quite finished. How far to Brookhaven? I asked. 11 minutes. I pushed the throttle to full. The Carrigan surged, 12 knots, then 14, which is above our rated cruising speed and which Kip would probably call me about in about 30 seconds. I didn't care. I needed to reach the dock. I needed to get every real, normal, legitimate passenger off this boat. And then I needed to see what was left. Kip called. "What are you doing?" "The drag is increasing. We're at 40% over baseline fuel burn now." "Hold the engines at full." "For how long?" 11 minutes. Kip didn't argue. He's been an engineer for 20 years. He knows when a captain's voice means, this is not a discussion. At 12:21, the PA clicked on again. This time, it was a voice. Not the water sound. Not the subvocal tone. A voice, female, calm, speaking a single sentence that I heard clearly through the bridge speaker. "You can't take us back." The PA clicked off. Wren looked at me. I looked at the camera monitor. The 4 women in the forward cabin hadn't moved. Their mouths were closed. The other passengers around them appeared undisturbed, as if they hadn't heard anything. 7 minutes, Wren said. At 12:23, Yara radioed from the upper deck. Her voice was controlled in the specific way that means someone is working very hard to keep it controlled. "Cap. The aft passengers are fine. But the forward cabin door is closed." "What do you mean closed?" "It doesn't have a door." "It does now." The forward cabin of the Carrigan's upper deck is an open-plan seating area. No doors. You walk in from the central corridor through a wide, permanently open entryway. There is no door. There has never been a door. I've walked through that entryway 1,000 times. Describe it. It looks like a ferry door. Like it belongs here. Like it was always here. White, same paint as the rest of the cabin. It's closed and there's no handle on this side. A door that looks like it belongs. Like it was always part of the vessel. But it appeared in the last hour, sealing the forward cabin from the rest of the upper deck. Sealing the real passengers inside with the copies of the woman in the green coat. Sealing them in for the crossing. Yara. Are the passengers in the forward cabin reacting? Are they trying to get out? A pause. Then, no one's knocking. No one's calling out. Through the window, there's a small window in the door, they all look normal. Sitting in their seats. Reading. Sleeping. They don't seem to know the door is there. Don't touch it. Come to the bridge. Already on my way. At 12:26, Brookhaven's dock was visible and real and close. I could see the terminal building, the parking lot lights, the dark shape of the gangway crane. 3 minutes. I radioed Tommy. Get the vehicle deck ready for disembark. Normal procedure. Cars off first, then pedestrians. Cap, what about the 15th car? Leave it. Get the 14 real vehicles off first. Pedestrians from the lower deck and the aft section after that. No one from the forward cabin comes off until I say so. How do I, Cap, how do I know who's from the forward cabin? I thought about that. The normal passengers in the forward cabin, the real ones, the ones who'd boarded at 11 o'clock, they were behind a door that hadn't existed an hour ago. On a camera that showed them sitting peacefully alongside a multiplying woman. Unaware. I'll handle the forward cabin myself. We docked at 12:29 a.m. Wren brought us in clean despite the speed and the drag. The Carrigan settled against the Brookhaven terminal with the familiar groan of fenders compressing, and Tommy had the vehicle ramped down within 90 seconds. Cars rolled off. 14 cars. The 15th, the silver sedan with no plates, remained where it was. I watched on camera 5 as the 14 legitimate vehicles departed, their taillights filing up the exit ramp and into the parking lot. Then Tommy gave the pedestrian signal and passengers from the lower deck and the aft section walked off the gangway. Yara counted them. 112. We'd boarded 89. My best count mid-crossing had reached an unstable number in the forward cabin. But the lower deck and aft passengers numbered what they should have numbered, minus the forward cabin's expected 17. 112 minus the forward cabin's original 17 equaled 95. We'd boarded 89. 6 extra people had walked off my ferry at Brookhaven. 6 who had boarded as one. Or who hadn't boarded at all. I didn't know which ones they were. They'd walked off the gangway and into the parking lot and I had no way to distinguish them from the Carden residents and tourists and commuters who were now climbing into their cars, confused about why they'd been returned to the mainland, checking their phones, calling people to explain they'd be late. 6 of them weren't doing any of those things. 6 of them were walking into Brookhaven, into the mainland, into a world they hadn't been part of when the night started. I'd turned the ferry around to stop the crossing. To prevent the woman in the green coat from reaching Carden Island. And I had. She hadn't reached Carden. But something else had reached Brookhaven. The forward cabin was my last task. I went alone. Ren wanted to come. I told him to stay on the bridge. The door Yara had described was there. White. Ferry standard paint. A small rectangular window at head height. It looked like it had been installed with the ship, part of the original build. I pressed my face to the window and looked through. The forward cabin was empty. Not just empty of the woman or her copies. Empty of everything. The seats were there, but no passengers. No blue-jacketed men. No teenager. No elderly couple. 17 real people had been in that cabin and they were gone. Their coats, bags, phones, the thermos the couple had been sharing, all gone. The woman in the green coat was gone. Seat 7C was empty. Seats 8C, 9C, and 10C were empty. The half-formed shape I'd seen on camera in 12C was gone. I tried the door. It opened easily from my side. Apparently the handle had always been there and Yara simply hadn't seen it, or it hadn't existed until now. I walked through the forward cabin, touching each seat, checking under them, checking the overhead compartments. Nothing. No personal effects. No sign that anyone had been there. Except on the window next to seat 7C. Condensation. As if someone had been breathing against the glass for a long time. And in the condensation, drawn with a fingertip, a number. 6. The same number of extra passengers who'd walked off the gangway. I think the woman in 7C made me an offer I didn't understand, and when I turned the boat around, I didn't reject the offer. I changed its terms. The crossing was supposed to go to Carden. She and whatever she was carrying, whatever was multiplying inside the forward cabin, filling the seats row by row, were supposed to reach the island. That was the transaction. That was what the ferry exists for, on the nights when the list applies. To carry something across. I refused. I turned around. And the something found another way. It took 17 real passengers from the forward cabin, absorbed them, replaced them, wore them, I don't know the right verb, and walked off at Brookhaven as 6 extra bodies in my count. I didn't carry them to Carden. So they took my passengers to the mainland instead. 17 people are missing. The ferry company launched an investigation. The Coast Guard was involved. I told them what I could tell them, that the forward cabin was empty when I checked it at dock, that passengers may have moved between decks during the turnaround, that the count was inconsistent. They're treating it as a manifest error combined with passenger confusion caused by the unexpected itinerary change. They won't find those 17 people. I know this because I've read the Kerrigan's log binder from cover to cover, all 20 years, and I found something I hadn't looked for before. Dolores Fenn's entries. Artie Beach's entries. Their notes about late boarders who did not disembark. Each note includes a number, the boarding count versus the disembark count. Every time, the disembark count is higher. 1 extra. Sometimes 2. Once, in Artie's tenure, 4. They'd always been there. The extra passengers. On every list crossing, for 20 years, something boarded as 1 and walked off as more. Wallace knew. Dolores knew. Artie knew. They all followed the list and accepted the count and didn't recount and let the late ones leave at their own pace and didn't watch where they went. The transaction was always this: something crosses the water using the ferry, and in crossing, it becomes more than it was when it boarded. The list doesn't prevent this. The list manages it. Keeps the numbers small. Keeps the exchange controlled. 1 becomes 2. 1 becomes 3. Containable amounts, absorbed into the island's population or the mainland's population without anyone noticing. But I refused the crossing. I turned the boat around with a full forward cabin and a passenger who'd broken every term of the list. And instead of a controlled transaction, 1 late boarder, maybe 1 or 2 extras, I got an uncontrolled one. 17 people disappeared. 6 extras walked into Brookhaven. The math doesn't even balance, which means either the remaining 11 are somewhere I haven't found or the rules of exchange aren't arithmetic at all. I'm still captaining the Carrigan. The company considered pulling me off the route during the investigation, but the night run has trouble retaining captains and I volunteered to stay. I need to stay. Because the list is mine now, and if I'm not on the bridge, whoever replaces me won't have it. Last Tuesday, a man boarded late. 11:13 p.m. No luggage. Walked with a stride too long for his body. I offered him a blanket. I seated him aft. I counted once and did not recount. I didn't look at him for more than 2 seconds. When he asked my name, I said nothing. When we docked at Carden, he was the last off. I didn't watch where he went. The boarding count was 104. The disembark count was 106. 2 extra. 2 people who weren't on the manifest walked onto Carden Island at 12:07 a.m. and disappeared into the dark, and I let them go because that's the cost of a clean transaction. That's the price of the list working. I don't know what they are. I don't know where they go. I don't know what happens to the places they walk into, the communities they join, the lives they assume or create or hollow out. But I know what happens when the list fails. 17 people. Gone. And 6 things wearing new shapes, loose in Brookhaven, because I tried to be the captain who said no. I don't say no anymore. I follow the list. I count once. And I let them off the boat.